He was born unwanted, rejected as a child. Yet he rose to become Africa's most feared king. His name struck terror across the continent, Shaka Zulu. Some call him a brutal tyrant, others call him a genius. But one thing is certain, Shaka Zulu changed warfare, forever. This is not just the story of a king. It is the story of survival, betrayal, genius, and blood. A boy who should have been forgotten in the dust of history, instead carved his name with steel and fire. Welcome to the untold story of Shaka Zulu. Before he was a king, before he was a legend, Shaka was a boy unwanted by his own people. The year was 1787. Deep in the rolling hills of southern Africa, a child was born to a Zulu chief named Senzangakona and his mother Nandi. But this was no royal celebration. Shaka's birth was a scandal. His parents were not properly married, and in the Zulu tradition, that meant shame. His father, embarrassed, rejected him. His tribe mocked him. His mother Nandi was insulted, called names that cut deeper than any spear. From the very first breath of his life, Shaka carried a burden heavier than any crown. He was the illegitimate child, the mistake, the outsider. And in a world where survival itself was a battle, this rejection was a death sentence. But Nandi, his mother, refused to let him break. She told her son again and again, "You are not weak. You are not cursed. One day, you will rise above them all." These words became Shaka's shield. As a boy, he lived in constant humiliation. Other children laughed at him, beat him, called him names. They threw stones, mocked his ragged clothes, and reminded him every day that he did not belong. Many would have broken under such cruelty. But not Shaka. Every insult, every wound, every moment of pain became fuel for the fire growing inside him. He learned to fight early, not in the battlefield, but in the dirt roads of his village. Fists, sticks, whatever he could find, Shaka fought back. Slowly, the bullies who once laughed began to fear his temper. But survival was not only about strength. Shaka studied animals, hunters, warriors. He watched how lions stalked their prey, how antelopes moved as one, how birds communicated without words. In nature, he saw the secrets of leadership and war. Even as a child, Shaka's mind was not ordinary. By the time he was a teenager, his body had grown tall and muscular. He could run for miles without rest, fight for hours without falling. Hunger and hardship became his training ground. Yet the pain did not stop. His mother and he were eventually cast out completely, forced to live as exiles. Shaka wandered, carrying the shame of rejection, but also carrying a dream. A dream of power. A dream of respect. In his heart, he made a silent promise: "One day, I will never bow again. They will bow to me." This was the birth of the man who would one day shake Africa itself. He had nothing, no land, no wealth, no allies. But he had something more powerful, unbreakable will. Shaka's childhood was not just suffering, it was the forge that created a warrior. When the world tried to bury him, Shaka sharpened himself into a weapon. And soon, he would get his chance to unleash it. Because the outcast was about to step onto the battlefield, and the world would never forget his name. From exile, to the path of greatness. Shaka's destiny was waiting, written in blood and fire. After years of rejection and humiliation, Shaka and his mother Nandi found themselves living among the Mthethwa people, a powerful neighboring tribe led by the wise chief Dingiswayo. This move would change the course of Shaka's life forever. Dingiswayo saw something unusual in the tall, fierce young man. Shaka's piercing eyes held both pain and hunger, hunger for respect, hunger for power. Where others saw an angry boy, Dingiswayo saw potential. He enlisted Shaka into his army. This was no ordinary army. The Mthethwa were locked in constant battles with rival tribes. Every warrior had to be sharp, disciplined, and fearless. For Shaka, this was his chance, his chance to prove he was more than the outcast everyone once mocked. From the very beginning, Shaka stood out. He was taller than most, stronger than most, and far more ruthless. When others trained until exhaustion, Shaka kept going. When others hesitated in battle, Shaka struck first. His childhood of suffering had made him relentless. But it wasn't just his strength. Shaka had something far more dangerous, a sharp mind. He studied every movement on the battlefield. He watched how men fought, where they hesitated, how they broke. He saw the weaknesses not only in his enemies, but in his own people's fighting style. At that time, warriors fought with long throwing spears, a weapon used to keep enemies at a distance. Battles were chaotic, often ending with both sides retreating after a few casualties. Shaka hated this. To him, war was not a game. War was meant to be won. So he did something revolutionary. Shaka shortened the spear into a deadly stabbing weapon, the iklwa. Unlike the long throwing spear, this new weapon forced warriors to fight up close, face to face. It was brutal, bloody, and decisive. At first, many laughed at his idea. Too risky, they said. But Shaka proved them wrong. In battle after battle, he charged with his iklwa, breaking enemy lines, killing with precision and ferocity. His courage was unmatched. Soon, other warriors followed his example, and victory after victory became the Mthethwa way. Dingiswayo was impressed. He gave Shaka more responsibility, more men to command. Under Shaka's leadership, warriors trained harder than ever before. He made them run barefoot over sharp stones to toughen their feet. He banned sandals, believing a true warrior must endure pain. He forced long marches, surprise drills, and endless discipline. The men hated him, but they respected him. Slowly, Shaka was building not just an army, but a machine of war. Then fate struck again. In 1816, news came that Shaka's father, Chief Senzangakona of the Zulu, had died. For the boy who once had been cast out, this was his moment. With the support of Dingiswayo and the loyalty of his warriors, Shaka seized control of the Zulu people. At first, the Zulu were just a small tribe, weak compared to their neighbors. But under Shaka's leadership, everything changed. He reorganized them, training them with the same ruthless discipline he had mastered. He turned farmers into fighters, hunters into soldiers, and outcasts into loyal warriors. His people began to grow stronger, prouder, united under one banner. The young chief who was once mocked as illegitimate now commanded respect. And his enemies? They began to tremble. Because Shaka Zulu was no longer just a soldier. He was becoming something far greater. A leader. A conqueror. A legend in the making. He was not just a king, he was an architect of war. Shaka Zulu didn't just fight battles, he rewrote the rules of warfare. By the time Shaka became chief of the Zulu, his tribe was still small compared to the great powers around them. But Shaka carried something far more powerful than numbers, vision. He was determined to transform the Zulu from a scattered clan into a fearsome empire. The key to his rise was not luck, but innovation. Shaka was a genius of military reform. His first great invention was the iklwa, the short stabbing spear. Unlike the traditional long assegai, the iklwa forced men into close combat. It was heavier, deadlier, and designed for killing, not for throwing. Warriors now had to look their enemies in the eye as they struck them down. The very sound of pulling the blade from a body, a sharp iklwa, gave the weapon its name. But Shaka did not stop there. He reshaped the entire way his army fought. Instead of chaotic charges, Shaka introduced strategy. His most famous tactic was the bullhorn formation. Here's how it worked: the chest of the bull, the strongest warriors, attacked the enemy head-on, pinning them in place. The horns, fast young warriors, circled around to surround the enemy from both sides. The loins, reserve forces, waited behind to crush anyone who tried to escape or reinforce. It was brilliant. Once caught inside the horns of the bull, an enemy had no chance of survival. Tribes that once mocked the Zulu now found themselves trapped, slaughtered, and erased. But Shaka's genius wasn't only on the battlefield. He revolutionized training. His men ran barefoot across thorny ground to toughen their feet. He banned sandals, believing they made warriors weak. Soldiers were forced to march up to 50 miles a day, carrying heavy shields and spears, ready to fight at any moment. If a man dropped behind, he was executed. Cruel? Yes. Effective? Absolutely. Within a few years, Shaka had transformed ordinary men into warriors who seemed unstoppable. His discipline extended to weapons and armor too. Shields were made larger, strong enough to push and trap an enemy's spear. Warriors learned not just to fight, but to dominate, using shields to smash into opponents before stabbing them with the iklwa. Word of Shaka's army spread across southern Africa like wildfire. Villages whispered his name in fear. Rivals who once saw the Zulu as weak began to flee before his warriors even arrived. Entire tribes collapsed, swallowed into Shaka's growing empire. And Shaka was not just a fighter, he was a master of psychological warfare. Before battle, he would terrify his enemies with war chants, shield banging, and displays of strength. His men charged in unison, like a single living beast. The sound alone broke the spirit of many opponents before the first spear was even thrown. Under Shaka's rule, the Zulu kingdom exploded in size. Dozens of clans were united under his banner, whether by choice or by conquest. He created not just an army, but a nation, forged in fire and blood. But genius often comes with darkness. Shaka demanded absolute loyalty. Disobedience was punished by death. Fear was as much a weapon in his arsenal as the spear. His empire was strong, but it was also fragile, held together by his iron grip. Still, in this era, no one could deny the truth: Shaka Zulu had changed the art of war. He had turned barefoot villagers into one of the most disciplined and feared fighting forces in the world. His enemies looked at him not just as a king, but as something closer to a force of nature. And yet, behind the victories and glory, a storm was brewing. For while Shaka's genius built an empire, his brutality threatened to destroy it. Power can build empires, but unchecked power can also destroy them. Shaka Zulu's greatest strength became his greatest curse. As Shaka's empire grew, so did his obsession with control. For him, weakness was unforgivable. He believed that only the strongest deserved to live, and he ruled with that philosophy etched into every decision. His warriors were pushed beyond human limits. They marched barefoot for miles over burning ground, trained until their bodies bled, and were expected to fight without hesitation. Any man who faltered, who stumbled in exhaustion, faced execution. To Shaka, fear was discipline, and discipline was survival. For his people, life under Shaka was both pride and terror. On one hand, the Zulu kingdom had never been stronger. Enemies trembled at their very name. But inside the kingdom, the cost of that power was steep. Families lived under constant fear of punishment, and every mistake could mean death. Shaka's cruelty became most visible in his treatment of conquered tribes. After victory, he often absorbed the young and strong into his army, but the weak, the elderly, and those who resisted were slaughtered without mercy. Villages were burned, survivors scattered. His empire expanded, but it was soaked in blood. Despite this, many still followed him with loyalty, believing his harshness was necessary for survival in a brutal world. Yet whispers of discontent began to grow. Then came the breaking point. In 1827, tragedy struck. Shaka's beloved mother, Nandi, the woman who had been his only source of unconditional love, died. For Shaka, it was a wound deeper than any spear. The boy who had once endured humiliation with her strength at his side was now alone. And grief twisted into madness. Shaka declared a period of mourning unlike anything the world had seen. For an entire year, no crops were to be planted. Fields lay empty, and hunger spread. No milk could be consumed. Thousands of cattle were slaughtered, their blood flowing across the land as offerings to the dead queen. He went further. Pregnant women were executed, for Shaka decreed that no new life should be born while the kingdom grieved. Any sign of joy, even a smile, was punished with death. Entire families were wiped out simply for failing to mourn enough. The once proud Zulu kingdom became a land of fear and starvation. People whispered that their king had lost his mind. The same man who had forged them into greatness was now drowning them in sorrow and blood. For the first time, cracks appeared in Shaka's iron rule. His generals grew restless. His people, once united by pride, were now broken by fear. Even those closest to him began to question whether his reign could continue. Yet Shaka did not see himself as cruel. In his mind, this brutality was justice. It was loyalty to his mother. It was proof that he ruled not just with power, but with absolute control. He believed his people would emerge stronger from their suffering. But the cost was unbearable. The very empire he had built with genius and blood was now trembling under the weight of his grief. And among his own family, betrayal was already taking root. Because a king who rules with fear can never truly be safe, not even from his own blood. Every empire rises in blood, and every empire falls in betrayal. Shaka Zulu's end was as dramatic as his life. By the late 1820s, Shaka Zulu stood at the peak of his power. His kingdom stretched across vast lands, his army unmatched, his name feared by friend and foe alike. To the outside world, he seemed invincible. But inside his own empire, shadows of doubt and resentment began to grow. Shaka's obsession with control had made him harsh and unpredictable. His warriors were exhausted from endless campaigns, his people weary of constant war. While his victories brought him fame, they also brought endless bloodshed. Many began to whisper, had the king lost his mind? The breaking point came in 1827, with the death of his beloved mother, Nandi. Shaka's grief was beyond measure. The boy who had once drawn strength from her love now collapsed into madness. He ordered a mourning period unlike anything ever seen. For one whole year, no crops were to be planted, no milk was to be consumed. Thousands of cows were slaughtered as offerings. Women found pregnant were executed, believing no child should be born while the kingdom mourned. Those who dared to smile or show joy were killed on the spot. The Zulu kingdom lived in fear, starving under the weight of their ruler's sorrow. To some, Shaka was no longer a genius, he was a tyrant consumed by his own demons. And in the silence of fear, betrayal began to stir. Two of his half-brothers, Dingiswayo and Mlangana, along with an ally named Mbopa, plotted against him. They knew Shaka's grip on power was slipping, and they feared that if he continued, the kingdom itself might collapse. In 1828, as Shaka walked among his men, unarmed and unsuspecting, the conspirators struck. Surrounded, the great king fought fiercely, but the betrayal was too deep. Spears pierced his body. The man who had been feared across an entire continent fell, not in battle against foreign enemies, but at the hands of his own blood. Shaka Zulu was dead. What cannot be denied is this: Shaka Zulu changed history. His tactics are still studied in military academies around the world. His story inspires pride in Africa, fear in his enemies, and endless curiosity in those who seek the hidden truths of history. He was the outcast who became a king. The rejected child who carved his name in fire and steel. His life was short, his reign turbulent, but his legend eternal. And so, centuries later, we still ask the question, was Shaka Zulu a tyrant, or a genius? A monster, or a maker of nations? Perhaps the answer does not matter. For in the end, history remembers only one thing: Shaka Zulu was feared as a monster, and respected as a genius. His empire was built with blood, yet his tactics changed history. Even centuries later, his name still echoes across the world. Was he a tyrant or a visionary? A destroyer or a creator? Perhaps he was all of these things, and that is why his story lives on. If you want more hidden stories of forgotten African history, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Because the past is not dead, it is waiting to be discovered.